There was a re-ranking on 247, their composite. So where did that put Nico, since On Three politically moved him up to number one?
Yeah, so I wanted to talk about this a little. I wanted to talk about this a little bit today. So Nico ended up number 2 in the 24/7 rankings, which I think is still a respectable position for your top recruit in your class to get the number 2 guy. But more importantly, I wanted to focus on the team rankings. So obviously for the 23 class, it was kind of set already, but Alabama pulled in 9 5-star prospects with the finalizing of the rankings and On Three and everything. So of all those sites, they pulled in 9 5-star prospects, and then Georgia was second and Texas was third. And between those two schools, they had 9 5-star prospects. So I'd like to hear y'all's thoughts on this. I think probably the worst thing that could have happened this year for teams trying to be on the come up was Saban having a rough season. Because from what I've heard, Saban hasn't been home since the season ended. He's just been, and usually he's in his early 70s, and Alabama has no coordinators. So he's been doing all this. He's been on the road doing all this recruiting, and he's been hitting the 24 class hard. And I mean, for the number 1 class in the class of 2023, have 9 5-star prospects, and I think the average rating was almost 95 out of. It goes up to 0.95 out of 1. I mean, and he's recruiting harder for this class. So I can't imagine. We're talking about recruiting battles. I can't imagine who Alabama's going to get this next cycle.
No, and in the end, I'll say this, Calhoun, that I still would rather have 2 classes worth of really, really good high school prospects, the 4 and 5-star guys, than I would have to scramble each and every year in the transfer portal. And that's what Alabama and Georgia have. And to some extent, you could say possibly Texas. They've had a couple of great recruiting classes back to back. I believe Ohio State is in that position. Just for a quick rundown, Oklahoma is number 5. So let's just go down it. Alabama 1, Georgia 2, Texas 3, Ohio State 4, Oklahoma 5, LSU is 6, Miami is 7, and Tennessee comes in at number 8. So I think that's a slight improvement. I think they were 10. So all in all, I think that you would rather have that base of talent to draw from. And I think, Calhoun, that Tennessee is building that. It just takes time.
Yeah, and I mean, they still are not out of the woods with the NCAA investigation. Hasn't been cleared yet, and they're getting top 10 classes. The other thing with Tennessee, they all, y'all, this is a cliche tale as old as time, X's and O's versus Jimmy's and Joe's, but like, okay, Tennessee's top 10. Okay, they're not top 5, but they're top 10. But of every one of those coaches that's on every other school, would you trust any of them to have a game plan better than Josh Heupel would have? Who would you trust? Which one of those coaches would you, outside of Brian Kelly, maybe, would you trust for a game plan for a one game over Josh Heupel?
No, I think they're right up there.
Yeah. So, you get a top 10 class and probably the best X's and O's guy in college football right now, maybe enough to stay competitive with those other schools. Again, they're 8th in the country. They're 4th in the SEC, though, and they're 6th in what's about to be the SEC. That's just insane to talk about.
And really, for National Signing Day coming up on February 1st, Tennessee doesn't have any prospects to watch, but the rankings are going to jump up and down because a lot of the guys still available are to the schools that are hovering in that 8, 9, 10, 11 range. Obviously, Georgia is in the mix for like Deuce Robinson and players like that, but I don't think Georgia's kind of stuck where they are. They can't go up because they're not picking up 5-star kids on National Signing Day. So they're probably solidified at 2. But really the only thing for Tennessee fans I would say to watch on National Signing Day is how the rankings change. And you talked about – because I think Tennessee was 10, and when On Three dropped their new rankings, Tennessee got boosted up to 8 when it all balanced out in the composites.
Well, I was told by somebody in Tennessee's administration that don't be surprised if they don't sign one guy on signing day, which is insane to me because I remember years where they signed 32 and you're chasing 32 kids on signing day. And so just don't be surprised if that happens. Sam said the most out-of-step rankings were the ESPN rankings. That's something I can hopefully provide a little bit of insight I would like to address. So when I worked at ESPN, there were they dove into recruiting, and that was the idea, and that didn't work out real well. So you had, I thought, better ratings of guys that were in their top 3 to 400 on their radar, and they have an ESPN 300. I thought that they were former players and former coaches that did a really good job of rating those guys. Now I think they're probably spread a little bit thin. I will tell you this, that I think there are zero politics. I think with all recruiting services right now, there are politics. The biggest sites on your network are going to get boosts in their recruiting rankings because you're going to say, and Nico's a prime example, you're going to say, well, Nico apparently had a great first half of January. I don't know what the hell he did, but he apparently had a great first week of January, so let's boost him up to number one. So, I mean, that's the benefit the local network of On 3, and 247 is going to do their thing for their best sites and their biggest sites. So I guess what I'm telling you is that I don't think ESPN has enough manpower, but I also will tell you this. I think ESPN is probably the most neutral of the groups. I don't think at the end of the day, the tail wags the dog. That makes sense, guys?
Yeah, it's probably not the best business move, funny enough, but I guess you could.
I think ESPN, their rank. I think the best way to put it is these recruiting sites are focused on recruiting. So ESPN's main focus is not recruiting. So you're going to see Nico. I think he's like number 46 or something crazy, and really they just don't update it. Like you saw Nico have a good senior year, and like he slowly climbed these rankings, whether it be politics or just good play. But I don't think ESPN updates them as often.
Well, and I'm sure too with the recruiting sites, again, talking about a business model, their idea is to re-rank all of these guys in January when people are talking about recruiting. Now that may change because the recruiting calendar has changed so much, but I think people are thinking about recruiting right now, and what they're doing is they're re-ranking these guys to create a little bit more buzz because it's January. That would be my thoughts, because there's nothing that Nico did since November. I don't know why you can't have monthly re-rankings. I mean, and maybe that happens one day. Goodness gracious, that'll be a lot to keep track of. Arthur says Nico and Joe, dual threat two-way starters, would benefit Tennessee. They both have, they're both great, but different dynamics. I'm just going to go on record. I've said it. I've written it. I think Nico is your starter by October.
I think Heupel's still too biased to Joe. I think Nico should be. I think Joe starts this year, but I think Nico will be the greatest quarterback in Tennessee history when it's all said and done, including above Peyton Manning. You heard it here first.
Well, now, if he's going to be the greatest ever, then he's going to start by his second month.
No, Tim Tebow didn't start his whole first year at Florida.
Jarreau, help me here. You can't be the greatest in history.
I mean,
field.
If he's the greatest in history, he's leaving his junior year. So I don't know if 2 seasons would mark.
He might break Peyton Manning's career record in 2 seasons.
Oh my God.
That might be
my big thing is whoever starts, I don't think you should do a 2-quarterback system because there's always so many issues with it. And so if there's a starter, if Heupel thinks Joe is the starter in August, then let Joe be the starter until he isn't. Don't have Nico come in the second and Joe play the third and Nico come back in the fourth, because you run into issues and it's just, you can't do that. It doesn't work.
I'm going to go ahead and tell you what's going to happen. He's going to come in against some of those lower rated opponents in September. Nico is, because the score's out of hand and he's going to play a lot. That might have been the spot you would put Taven Jackson in, who's now at Indiana. But now Nico's going to come in and people are going to fall in love with him. Just wait. I mean, people talk about how far Joe Milton throws the football and everything. The problem is it takes the better part of half an hour for it to get out of his hand. I mean, so the ball comes out of Nico's hand like it's a grenade, and he needs to get rid of it before it blows up in the pocket. I mean, when I look at them both, it's another level. I've been wrong before. By the way, all three of us thought Tennessee would beat South Carolina. So
I need Jarreau, when you get you're a little young, go to YouTube though. Just do this because this happened. 1997, Google Florida State on YouTube. Spurrier's finest coaching moment. He didn't just alternate quarterbacks on the series. He alternated them every play. Every other play, he had a different quarterback take a snap, and Florida beat Florida State doing that day.
Travis, I do not hate Joe Milton. I think Tennessee is a 10-10 team with Joe Milton. I like Joe Milton. I just think that Nico's special, and I think that Joe Milton has some limitations. If the deep ball doesn't connect and Calhoun brought this number up. If it doesn't connect 30% of the time at least, then this offense is not what it's designed to be, because then that stretches the field. So you stretch horizontally and vertically. So listen, if he's hitting 3 out of 10 on the deep balls, which maybe he needs to hit more because they're running bare because of the scheme, then everything's fine. Everything's cool. Nobody's leaving, but nobody's getting benched. But listen, and people are going to come, and I'm ready for this. People are going to come at me after spring and into August, and they might even call Joe Milton the starter, but it's so that Joe Milton doesn't transfer. I'm telling you.
Smoking Mountain Red, don't do Jarreau like that. Don't refer to Jarreau as Jarreau. Come on.
So that is the worst rapper in the history of man.